My name's Luke Kelly and I work for British Land and their development team. I also sit on the committee for the BCO NextGen and would like to express our gratitude to our presenter today, Mr. Roger Madelin, CBE. Roger sits on the British Land's Executive Committee and co-leads British Land's development of Canada Water. Roger is also an Honorary Fellow of the RIBA, an Honorary Fellow of the College of Estate Management, and was awarded a CBE for services to sustainable development in the 2007 honours list. I firmly believe his colourful and hugely successful career to date will act as inspiration for us all, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Samantha has kindly put the NHS donation link within the chat box, so if you're able to please contribute to this fantastic cause, that would be appreciated. During the presentation, if you could please put your microphones on mute to prevent any feedback, and please do post any questions on the comment function throughout the presentation, and we'll respond to them at the end. Over to you, Roger.
Hello everyone. I'm not sure how many people are there other than Luke. 33 degrees outside, so maybe some of you have come into shelter from the heat. But if you are there, welcome. I'm very privileged to be talking to you. It's very strange not knowing who's there, but let's have a look at the first image, which is, as I'm sure all of you know, the de Havilland Mosquito, the best multi-role performing military aircraft ever in the history of the world. And the reason I'm showing it is that is the one, or certainly the type, that my father was in just after the war. And I grew up with aviation. He did leave the RAF before I was born, but he carried on in aviation as an operation controller at Farnborough, and his brother was a fighter pilot. So aviation stories, going up in aeroplanes from 10, I was going to be an astronaut or a test pilot or a pilot. Did reasonably okay at school, did maths, physics, geography A-levels, because those were the 3 A-levels to be a pilot and get promoted. And obviously I wasn't going to fly a Mosquito. I wasn't going to fly a B-17 either. I was going to fly one of those or something like that, Top Gun. But just going back to the B-17, there's a kind of relevance here with the Mosquito, and one of the first points I'd like to make. Now, the Mosquito could fly at 400 miles per hour and 40,000 feet and could carry, in its first version, a lot of bombs if it needed to. In fact, just as many bombs as the B-17, but the Mosquito only had 2 crew in it, and most of them came back from the missions. Whereas the B-17, the American way to start bombing Germany and help with the war effort, had 8 crew, and very sadly, most of those didn't come back. So why didn't the Americans fly Mosquitoes? You know, it was faster, it carried just as many bombs. And it was operationally much more successful. And the reason for that is it wasn't American. It's not that they were saying, you know, yah-boo, we're not going to buy British stuff. But it was very important for the economy to mobilise, you know, after the 30s terrible recession, you know, to get the population of America behind the war effort. And although the B-17 was not very successful at first, it became more successful as the war went on, and they developed their own methods for protecting it, particularly fighter aircraft. And the point I'm making there is there's often 2 or more different solutions to many problems you come across in business, but quite often the solution that comes from the locality or the particular environment you're in is often the better solution. So don't get focused on the fact that, you know, there's always an absolute right solution. Quite often there's a number of solutions. Unfortunately, when I went for the final eye test for the RAF, I didn't wear glasses at the time, but my eyesight just didn't comply with their then requirements. So I had been selected, and then I wasn't taken forward as a pilot. And I spent another few months trying British Airways and Bristol Helicopters, and I hadn't got a place at university. University term had started, and when I came back after failing the eyesight test at Bristol Helicopters, my father said, I've phoned up Aston University, I've got a place for you doing civil engineering if you want. And I'm not sure whether it was the next day or after the weekend or something, we got in the car, drove up, and I ended up at Aston University doing civil engineering. Now, I'd never thought that that's what I wanted to do for obvious reasons. The A-levels I did, I guess, could have allowed me to do most kinds of engineering, but civil engineering I ended up doing. And a few weeks into the term, bear in mind I didn't arrive at the beginning of the term, I was sat in a soil mechanics lecture with a very heavily accented, brilliant Polish lecturer, and I just thought, this is so difficult, I must be behind on this. And the year head asked me how I was finding university, and I said, well, I'm enjoying it, but it's bloody difficult. Have you got any other courses? And he said, yeah, we've got lots of different courses. If you want to swap, we can do production engineering, mechanical engineering, building engineering, building economics. And I ended up doing what they called then a building degree. And I've got to say that I thoroughly enjoyed it, and everything, literally everything I learned, every subject that we covered, I have used in my career. And I guess that was very lucky. It was a very good broad course with enough technical stuff, but also had legals and marketing and economics and stuff. So I kind of bumbled my way into building. It was a sandwich course, and I finished university in 1981. And if anyone knows from the history books, that was a pretty grim recession. Maybe this one will overtake it in terms of unemployment, but I was lucky. It was a sandwich course, so I had been working through the university. And what happened, and any of you are worried, well, I'm sure you're all a bit worried about employment in the economy and everything around. But if you do your job well and you are young, you're probably paid a lot less than others around you. And quite often, when cuts are made, firms do look at cutting, obviously, more expensive people, or they should do. And I was lucky, I guess, that I had two bosses who were made redundant in the early 80s, and they were never replaced. And no one ever asked me how old I was. And I'm not saying I was good at my job, but I was kind of good enough, and I worked hard. And I will tell you a bit more about that in a sec. But what I did do was I spent a lot of time flying all sorts of other things, being brought up in a flying family, and I travelled. I was very lucky. I travelled with my parents camping across Europe. I've always travelled and loved structures like this. This is Millau Bridge by Norman Foster. But I also love not only natural environments, but sitting in urban environments and towns and cities and villages in France and Italy and the UK, and just thinking why some places are so much more comfortable to be in and so much more enjoyable than others. And I have always been fascinated by the natural environment and the built environment. And being a builder, which I was until I was 25, I started to not only understand about the building industry and how tough that was to manage thousands of components, during weather thrown at you, including massive, severe winters in the early 80s when we were trying to build Tesco's. But I was very intrigued what happened before with the design and the planning, and I started to question whether the process before the poor old builder had to get building a Tesco superstore in 44 weeks had been managed as well, and who came up with that stupid design or that amazing design or that very difficult to build design. And I started talking to various people, and kind of by happenstance, although I was offered a position with one of the consultants who was working on some of the projects, I met a chap I'd known a few years before, driving through streets of London. I shouted some obscenity greeting at him, and ended up in the pub, and he said, don't go work for a consultant, come and work for a developer. So I ended up working for a developer at the age of 25. And when I handed my notice in to the building contractor boss, yeah, he said, "Well, you're mad, you're crazy. You'd be the MD here if you stayed long enough, and the developer's probably going to go bust anyway." And I said, "Hang on, you're the deputy MD and you're in your blooming 30s. I'm going to have to wait a long time." Anyway, he didn't retire till he was 65. But the developer ended up with, after the developer I left for went bust, as he said, did work on £1 billion of constructions with that old MD. So I certainly left on good terms. So that's a lesson everyone tells you. Don't burn your bridges. Talking about bridges, let's see if I can go up to the next one. But working on quite major building projects, can't seem to move it. Oh, no. We go back. Working on major building projects and not knowing much, at the age of 23, 24, 25, I knew very, very little. And just through almost panic, you've got 20 fully laden concrete lorries, trundling towards you to pour a slab that you're not really sure whether the person's leveled it out properly. You not only have to trust people, but you soon realise what you don't know, and making people realise what you do know and what you're trying to do and what your job is, and then engendering a team to pull together where everyone that knows their stuff is allowed to get on and do their stuff, and being very honest about what you don't know. I had to be, because I just knew so little. And this was a little kind of triplet of management rules that actually I pulled together at Argent when I left contractor and joined Argent, and it stayed pretty useful all the way through my career, and others have found it useful as well. And the first point, no surprises, is pretty obvious. If you think about it, anything you're trying to do in business, plan, prepare, research, look at the logistics, what can go wrong, all the things that you should do before you start on any venture. And I've been pretty good at that, I guess, before I started work with some of the trips I've done abroad, some of the expeditions I've done. And number two, don't take the piss. Almost everything you do in life, if not everything you do in life, is as part of a team, whether it's a marriage or certainly in work. You very, very rarely do things on your own. And each member of the team, whether an engineer or an architect or a builder or a window fitter or a scaffolder or a bricklayer, they've all got their own kind of business objectives. They all need to make money. They're probably all highly qualified, experienced people, and structuring the relationship with those teams so you don't thwart people's opportunities to satisfy their objectives and make some money is part of good management. And if any one of the team members starts to not do what they're good at and what they've fitted into the process to do, they are taking the piss. And I've found that if you can build a strong team, that is the best way of encouraging everyone to pull their weight, because as soon as someone doesn't pull their weight, you soon realise, and you can kind of gang up on them. Obviously, hopefully it doesn't get that far, but the peer pressure, almost the camaraderie, if you structure the team right, does enable things to happen very well. And the third rule is, excuse my language, is fuck it. And that's not implying some sense of bravado. It's if you say to people, these are the business decisions, these are the decisions that we've got to make in this process, and sometimes the decision might be we're not going to go forward beyond this step. But if you bring people along with you, what you're trying to achieve and what steps there are on the way to achieving that, and you explain that we're going to take a month, we're going to look at the planning, we're going to look at the market in a little bit more detail, and in a month's time we're going to pull all that together, and we might decide we're not going to do it. We're going to walk away. You're not surprising people. Hopefully you're not pissing them off, but make a decision. Sometimes that decision is, yes, let's move to the next step, or let's do some more research or something like that. But keeping people informed and making decisions, I've found, is very important. A friend of mine did come up with a fourth rule. I don't think it's a particular fourth rule, but I have found it very useful, and that is sleep on it. If you get news in and you want to make a quick reaction, particularly bad news, sometimes just try and step back, sleeping on it, metaphorically and sometimes physically. You wake up in the morning with a different perspective, sometimes quite often a lot more positive, even if you have had quite a challenge thrown at you. Let's move on pretty quick. So looking at the time, I think I've got sticky fingers on here. Well, I went to university in Birmingham at Aston. It used to look like that when I was up there. It was quite exciting as a student in the 70s. A lot of World War II dereliction still around, good bars were popping up, great music scene, Motor City, huge retail, the bull ring there. And reason for showing you that is during the 1980s, when I didn't go up to Birmingham that often, a lot of things were happening. Birmingham City Council had got together to try and deal with the hemorrhaging of employment in the city and around the city in the West Midlands, with manufacturing jobs falling, and they got this 280 million of investment from the EU, and they largest pedestrianisation plan delivery in Europe at the time, and they built the International Symphony Hall, they built the International Convention Centre, they built the National Indoor Arena, and they came up with this plan that had complete cross-party support. When I went up with colleagues in 1993, having joined Argent, who hadn't done any development when I met Michael and Peter, just Michael and Peter and three ladies, one of whom is now my lovely wife. They kind of bought the company that I was with, just about went bust, and we expanded development pretty fast during the late 80s, and we came across Brindley Place in '93 from the receiver, and this is what it was like, and I think partly because I'd experienced Birmingham and then suddenly realised the changes, I got very, very, very interested in how individual companies can do things that can make quite a big difference. And there was huge political support to invest. The developer that had started the planning process here had gone bust. They were the developer that did Broadgate, or certainly half of the development business that did Broadgate, Rosal. And the thing about Michael and Peter from Argent, who I met in 1987, they were bright solicitors, and they always looked at the figures very, very carefully, and they taught me that things can go wrong, things can go out of your control and go wrong, and you should always protect the downside. You should always look at the downside. Yes, of course you're doing it, hopefully for the upside, but that worst case, medium case, best case was what drove Michael and Peter's thinking when I met them, and we started actually developing in 87, 88 office buildings and industrial buildings around and in London. And their kind of honesty almost, but it was honesty to themselves, that sometimes things in the appraisal were out of your control. You might be able to fix the building cost, you might have got a pre-let, but if you haven't, there are risks. What's the downside? What's the worst that can happen? How can you protect your position? And lots of examples in the late 80s and early 90s where developers didn't look at the downside, and Rosal were one of those companies that had borrowed huge amounts of money, spent huge amounts of money without looking at the downside. So Argent, as we came out of the recession, acquired Brindley Place. And the first thing we did, it did have planning, but we looked at how to deliver such a large scheme. Doesn't feel large, maybe by some comparisons now, but it's kind of like the largest in the city private sector development at the time. I think it was 25 buildings or something. How can you develop it in economically viable phases? And if you have to stop after each one, how can you make sure that it's still a decent place? People still might want to occupy the building because it's nice. So we designed it so you could put the public realm in, as you'll see there in the centre of the shot, and each plot could come forward on its own at a particular time to suit whether we built it speculatively or pre-let. And you can just see on the left there, there's a triangle that's surrounded by water canals. That was Berkeley Homes that we did a joint venture with, building what they said was the first kind of private sector apartment buildings in a city, and they reckon that this was the scheme that certainly encouraged them to start building apartments in city centres again, and others then followed. So Brindley Place had a lot of good things that it taught us, and kind of led the market in some ways. I do have a little trouble with moving the slides on here. One of the things that really struck home with us about going up to Birmingham was not only the strong political support, which I think if you're doing any project that requires planning, banging your head against the wall in planning is not a very productive thing. Oh, I can't move these
Roger,
forward.
I think it might be just taking control of my screen again.
Yeah, I've done that. Your remote control is paused by Luke. Tap to resume. Try again. No, can you move it on? Can you move it? Blimey, that's about 10 on. Anyway, but what
you should be in
Birmingham,
sorry, Roger, if you tap your screen, you should be in control of it now.
What Birmingham had done is not only built a very strong political consensus about what it wanted to do to the city, but it had also invested 280 million quid of pedestrianisation infrastructure right up to the land that we acquired. And looking back, on all the projects that the bigger projects that I've been involved with, where you're moving not only with the political environment but also the investment environment, where others are very much supporting what you're doing with investment, is obviously a great start. There's no way that we were going to spend 250 million building conference centres and international arenas and symphony halls and stuff like that. I'm trying to move forward. There's some of the pedestrianisation. It's not a guarantee to success, but obviously it helps with what you're doing. I can't remember if I showed you in the earlier shots the sail plane, the glider that I did used to fly a lot. Not being a fighter pilot, I did fly lots of other, and I still do fly other planes and sail planes. And the thing about sailplanes that really captured me was just the power of the natural environment. How sailplanes can fly thousands of miles in one flight just with thermal currents. I've flown 500 kilometres in the UK, and today you could probably fly 300, 400, 500 kilometres, and you just need to get up in the air somehow, towed up behind an airplane or a winch. And that ability to harness the environment, harness the sun, harness natural uplifts has always made me fascinated by energy saving, and why aren't we doing things better? And one of the buildings that we've just gone past, I won't go back to, for Brindley Place, which won the first BCO Best of the Best outside of London. It was a building in the 90s, after Kyoto, that we tried very hard to not only reduce the amount of energy that it used, but also had different energy systems in it that could then reduce the energy costs. We weren't looking at things like carbon intensity on the materials, but we were starting to think about that. We got very excited and very committed to following on from the Kyoto and some of the things that some of the politicians were saying. But I've got to say that in the last 10 years, you might feel the environment, and the importance of environmental sustainability has been there. But I can tell you it's been a very, very disappointing past 20 years or so. After the Kyoto summit, there was a lot of impetus, but government said lots of good things like zero carbon homes, and government said they're only going to take BREEAM outstanding or BREEAM excellent buildings, and then they didn't. And then they didn't demand zero carbon homes and stuff. And the world, kind of didn't bother really about carbon emissions, as we know, looking at the figures. It's come back again. Some of you will say it's never gone away, but it does feel kind of serious this time. It feels there is enough concern now that we will really need to start doing the things that some people were looking at in the early 90s, and some. But it does feel a little bit deja vu to me. Some of the things we tried didn't work so well, but British Land, Canada Water, I know most of the development industry, are looking very, very seriously at environmental sustainability now, and we are hoping, desperately hoping, that governments start to look at all of the issues around, from energy production, to transport, to consumption, and all of the agriculture, all of those things. So I won't get on to post-COVID thoughts, but there does seem to be a political will now, or a political boot to get things done. Anyway, because we did Brindley Place, I was lucky enough to have become the Chief Executive of Argent in '97. Argent had been on the stock market for 3 years, which was an interesting experience. I was one of the 4 directors in the late 80s. We kind of didn't really know what we were doing, but again, that philosophy of always asking people that know more than you so how do you win something like King's Cross? You have experience from Brindley Place. You also have finance behind you that's very long term. Argent left the stock market, and British Telecom Pension Scheme backed us as a private developer, and we were shortlisted with Lend-Lease and AMEC, British Land, and Land Securities, and lots of the big players went for it. And I guess our winning strategy, if you think the experience wasn't a lot, was they would get us driving it forward. I guess, I don't know who put the bid in for British Land or who put the bid in for Land Securities or Lend-Lease. We said this is kind of personal. I'd spent 9 months doing the due diligence as much as I could before we put the bid in. We said there is so much to learn before you start putting pen to paper, let alone spades in the ground. And I tried to learn as much about as many things as I could, so to become the expert in as much of King's Cross as I possibly could. And I spent a lot of time doing that. It was a very slimline presentation because we didn't do a scheme. But anyway, they chose us, and kind of the rest is history. And that scheme, just for interest, started to come out of the ground properly at the end of 2008. And, I don't need to tell you what the economy was like then. Are some similarities, obviously, to now and moving forward, but some huge differences. And in many ways, this is much scarier. But we're going to have some. British Land's going to have some interesting decisions at Canada Water moving forward, and other developments, as other companies are. But we are optimistic. Let's just move forward. I won't tell you too much about King's Cross, other than some kind of career lessons that I did assemble a very small team at Argent. I did stay absolutely involved in as much as I could. We didn't employ consultants. It's not. We didn't kind of like use consultants at all to in terms of public consultation, other than to help us. So if there was ever any queries or questions, I would say I would go anywhere, any place, any time to listen, to talk, to discuss with anyone that was concerned or wanted to know more. Not everyone was concerned. Some people just wanted to know more. And that's certainly being accessible, I guess, certainly brought a number of huge benefits. Being prepared to do that as my main job. I do remember I was in a meeting with Camden Council, and they were talking about their consultation that they had to do once the planning application had gone in, and the head of the planning said, I've been to about 20 meetings in the last couple of months, and every blooming meeting I've been to, bloody Roger's already been there, hasn't he? And he's seen them, and like, when does he do his day job? And my colleague said, well, that is his day job. And it was a very important part of my job, and we learned a huge amount from a huge number of people. And it's not just residents' associations, although they were very important. It was a lot of technical meetings and network rail and stuff like that. But what we were trying to do at King's Cross, and I'll tell you a bit about Canada Water towards the end, was create an amazing new piece of central London, an extension of central London. So it wasn't going to be an office campus, it wasn't going to be a big retail centre, it wasn't going to be a big residential centre. It was going to be a great new piece of central London, with some great public spaces. And you think of some of the best parts of cities, best parts of towns, they've all got a big town square, they've got a public building. Usually at the head of them, you're not going to get a big town hall generally, but we had the granary. And we were very fortuitous to find central St Martin's. That's the next door track we're going through. Master planning was very expensive. I can think of half a dozen major schemes in and around London that haven't been built, where master plans have been done, redone, put in the bin, redone. Hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent, and schemes have never been built. And our experience from Brindley Place, my experience from Brindley Place, King's Cross, certainly stood us in good stead, being able to implement a economically viable phased development, as I mentioned, where each building can come forward, or as many buildings can come forward as in a variety of ways as possible to create a good environment. The white train in St Pancras Shed there was the German high-speed train that was meant to connect central London to Cologne and Frankfurt in 2013, I think. And my experience of public sectors, states, making commitments up front, you just have to be very careful. King's Cross Station was going to be rebuilt for 30 years, and it never happened until we won the Olympics. High Speed 1, the railway going into St Pancras, I don't think would have happened unless John Prescott got embarrassed and just said to the French, well, we're going to do it, and no one had worked out how to fund it. And I think until some of these big kind of public sector political statements are coming out of the ground, or ideally finished, because there's lots of history of things being stopped, not particularly blaming politicians. It is a bit annoying and very wasteful of money. Quite often don't rely on statements. You know, Crossrail was going to happen for 30 years. So it's just an example. London's beach, I think it's become, isn't it? Right, moving on quickly if I can. What are the lessons from King's Cross as a career? Do a lot of listening. Be very humble. Everyone's got something to teach you, something to tell you, and you cannot short circuit listening to people. I did go to one church hall to meet a group of people. I arrived on my bike, because some of you might know I've been cycling in and around London for 30 years. I can't move this again. Can you move it, Luke? I arrived at.
It's in your control, unfortunately, Roger. Unless I remove that as an embarrassing.
Right, okay, we'll stop there. Yeah, I arrived at this meeting, and I arrived a bit early, and I wasn't wearing a suit. I don't wear a suit that much. I haven't done for several decades. And they just let me in. They didn't say, who are you, or anything like that. And eventually they looked at their watch and they said, bloody developer's late. Yeah, we give him a hard time when he arrives. And they turned around and suddenly realised I was there. And I said, oh, who are you? And I went, I'm Roger Madelin, the Chief Executive of Argent. And they went, oh, you don't look like a developer. And I said, well, I do. Yeah, how many developers have you met? Of course, I hadn't met any. And it's very disarming. You know, actually, if you go to places and go to listen, it's a very educational and very rewarding thing most of the time. So after 29 years at Argent and I think 17 years at King's Cross, I was stepping back from full-time work, and Chris Grigg at British Land, who I had known for a while, not that well, but you know, you meet people in industry, and another lesson is to keep meeting people, you know, in your sphere of industry as much as you can, cups of coffees, beers, you know, events like this. And Chris's PA phoned up, just go back a sec, and said, I understand you're still looking to build a new town. That was one of the big aspirations while I was at Argent. He said, I've got one for you, and it's Canada Water. He said, do you want to come and run it? And I said, that's very kind of you, but probably not. I had been to Canada Water, and I said, how much land have you got? And he said, 46 acres. And almost. I said, is it freehold? And he said, almost. Anyway, I went there with my wife. It's in the centre. British Land now got 53 acres in the centre of that shop. And you've probably noticed two large amounts of green space to the left and to the right. Well, that's Southwark Park on the left, 65 acres, and Russia Woodlands on the right. And then you've got Greenland Dock at the bottom. It's 120 acres of green and blue stuff that connect straight to British Land's ownership. And I got there from Bond Street in 14 minutes. It's 11 minutes from Green Park. I started cycling there from various parts of London, get to the Bank of England in 9 minutes if you want to cycle to the Bank of England. And you just suddenly realise that, you know, getting a piece of central London to develop like this, I think it is more exciting than King's Cross, genuinely, because, you know, of the way the world's going, environmental sustainability, health and well-being, those connections to the green and blue stuff. And I think, you know, being able to do developments that can positively affect people's lives. I'm not saying, you know, developers and property people, you know, are going to change people's lives more than anyone else, but you are part of the process. So if you're building affordable housing, or if you're building retail or leisure, or if you're building health facilities, you do get involved with those industries, education industries. Central St Martin's, we've got a university now basing themselves at Canada Water Applied Science University. It is an absolute privilege to work with those people and understand their needs and demands, and try and work with them to do better than they expected or they had experienced in the past. And experience from Brindley Place, from King's Cross, and with brilliant colleagues, some of whom are at British Land, some of whom joined me. I think we have come up with an extraordinarily positive master plan. If I can get to the next one, Luke. No. Can you move to the next one? We're not moving to the next one. So we can deliver a major first phase. The existing ownership of British Land has got quite a successful tired 1980s shopping centre there. It's now got most of the shops reopening again. It's got cinema, it's got bowling, it's got bingo, it's got massive printworks, which some of you may know has become one of the most successful and popular cultural music events, which you might touch on a little bit later. But we can deliver 40 odd new buildings, and 50% of it is amazing public realm and green space, and we connect into this 120 acres of amazing green space. And I think if you believe that we are going to have to change some aspects of design and location post-COVID, to allow for the eventuality of more lockdowns, or more fresh air, or better access to natural environments, which we were all agreeing we should do anyway. Canada Water's kind of the post-COVID scheme. That's not because we knew this bloody pandemic was going to be upon us, but that's just kind of the way we were thinking at British Land anyway. And I think it really could be an exemplar, not just for London, but as people like Tim Smith, who's the Eden Project working with us, says, we can do things that are of national significance at Canada Water, and if it's of national significance in the UK, that means it's international significance. So I'm very excited. I said to Emma Carriaga, my joint head of Canada Water, who's just brilliant. I said I feel 10 years younger as a result of getting involved in this. Doesn't mean I'm going to annoy her and be around for 10 more years, but it is just the most exciting project to do. And I think it is just a bit more relevant than King's Cross. King's Cross was always going to be an amazing office location because of the transport. So I'll just finish with a few themes. There's the printworks as it is today and in operation. If we can just get to the end. I guess the themes are, there's always more than one solution to problems, or generally. The power of the environment and environmental sustainability is stating the blooming obvious. It's just become so important. If you go right to the end, keep travelling, keep looking. You don't have to travel internationally to the other side of the world. There's some amazing places and spaces in and around London, but do ask yourself when you're out all the time, why is this good? Why is this better? Never ever be afraid to say you don't know, and always ask for advice. People, you ask in the right way. I have found that teams work better when they've got someone leading them. I'm lucky to lead teams, where there's someone who has the honesty and humility, I guess, to say when they don't know stuff. Leverage. Birmingham, Brindley Place had the investment from the City Council and the political will. King's Cross obviously had the transport going in with High Speed 1, and then when we won the Olympics, the the rest. And Canada Water, you might say, well, what's Canada Water got? Well, it's got the Jubilee line and the overground, which is having money invested in it. But blooming heck, it's got, you know, Southwark Park, Russia Dock Woodlands, and Greenland Dock, and you know, there is no other place that can have that kind of leverage at the moment. And try stuff. You know, if you are leading an organisation, or if you're a developer, you know, it is your job. You know, you do have the ability to try stuff. Yeah, you can ask people, you can ask consultants, but sorry to be rude, but you know, consultants, and I know this is, no, I'm not going to say that, but you know, sometimes consultants are hardworking and brilliant, but they quite often, if they've got PI, you know, they do have to look back as to what's happened to get any real kind of authority with what they're saying. Whereas a developer can just go, no, I'm going to build residential above an office, as we did at Brindley Place, or we are going to put a restaurant under an office building, or we are going to try co-living, or we are going to try, you know, an elderly cluster. You know, we are going to try this. You know, we are going to, you know, not have fan coils in the ceilings, you know, in the 1990s. We are going to have you know, just try stuff. You know, look at the downside. And as Rockefeller said, I think it was Rockefeller, you know, when asked, you know, what's the key to success? You know, get up early, work bloody hard, go to bed late, and strike oil. Well, you know, there must be a new thing other than striking oil, but I guess I have kind of worked hard. I do like leading from the front, and I don't know any really successful person that is a lazy bugger. So I will end there and go to some questions.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Roger.
Yeah.
That was incredibly insightful, and thank you very much for the presentation. We've got a couple of questions from the attendees. First one from Christopher Allen. There's been criticism of construction that it suffers from a lack of leadership. You, along with a handful of others, including Sir Stuart Lipton, Ian McPherson and Paul Morrell, are considered leaders both past and present. What values are you looking for in construction's next leaders? Where will they come from?
Wow, I think there are some good leaders out there. I certainly know some in the contractors we're talking to at Canada Water and British Land's using elsewhere. I think it's creating the right environment for them to feel happy and supported in their leadership. Argent, I'm just trying to think, I don't think, other than a few buildings in the late 80s, we tendered any construction. We formed alliances or partnerships with 2 and then 3 as we got bigger, and we used that kind of team structure to collaborate and look at cost performance of the industry, look at safety performance, look at program performance, quality performance. And back to that peer pressure, you know, if there was a team in another contractor who was pulling together information that showed they were doing things better, by gee, you know, the other contractor's team, you know, wanted to do as well, if not better, not in a nasty way, because they kind of knew that we were working with them both. They weren't trying to, you know, dish one of the others. And I found that, you know, people who didn't necessarily have directors, car parking space, or chief executive, although all the chief executives we worked with in those businesses were I would say, you know, leaders, good leaders. The leadership doesn't have to come from the very top. Although I'm pretty impressed with a lot of leaders in the contractors. It's British Land just lucky, Luke, you know, but we've got Alpine, I don't know.
I think so, yeah. We've got
Broadgate and Lend-Lease and
plethora of leaders within the contractors we're engaged with. We've got quite long-term relationships as well.
Yeah, I think they need good clients. The answer is, I think, you know, leadership will come when you've got good clients. Be a good client.
Next question is from Fraser Davis. As part of it, you've got a compliment here as well, which is good. King's Cross is such an incredibly layered and rich piece of urban design with some fantastic individual buildings too. It's been so exciting to see it evolve upon each London visit. There are massive regeneration plans over the coming decade in Glasgow, including that of the catalytic Barclays development. On the city scale, how could Glasgow learn from King's Cross development?
Well, King's Cross had the scale, and its ambition was always to be a piece of city, and stewardship of that city was the number one priority. We set out a vision, and I say we, it was very much with Camden Council at the time. I'm sure now Camden Council had actually very good political leadership. Dame Jane Roberts was the leader of Camden Council. She had some challenges, amongst her Labour colleagues, but there were good politicians in all the parties, and she was a great leader, kind of pulling them together and bringing together a great team of planners who were, in theory, on the other side of the table from us. We were against Camden, they were against us, but it was never like that. It was very collaborative. This is a new piece of London we're creating. These streets, these squares are public streets and squares now. I could talk about that and private ownership and stuff like that. Very, very pragmatic discussions, very open discussion. And I think if somewhere like Glasgow is approaching their redevelopment as a new piece of Glasgow, and the developer, if it's Barclays up there, they've done some terrific stuff, as a new piece of city, that the public realm, the framework of public realm is going to be there for hundreds of years, isn't it, if it's done right. Successful cities generally are ones where the framework has been there for centuries. You get the framework right, especially if you're doing a new one and you're halfway there. Thanks for complimenting some of the buildings on King's Cross. I think it kind of run out of steam a bit. I would say this, wouldn't I? I think some of the first buildings were innovative and good. I'm not saying the subsequent buildings are not good, but I think could have just pushed a bit more with some of the later buildings environmentally. I think could have pushed a bit design-wise. I think some of them could have pushed a bit. I think some of the mix of uses could have been slightly greater mix of uses, but you have to respond to the market. And the framework at King's Cross, streets, squares, I think are world class, and that enables buildings to come and go. Hopefully they won't come and go every 5 minutes, but it allows kind of good ordinary buildings to happen. Not every building at King's Cross does need to be amazing. There are some good ones, and I think that's good enough.
Thank you, Roger. I'm conscious of time and letting everyone enjoy some sun. Last question here from Richard Sampson. What do you believe is the most important decision you have to make as a developer in the early stages of a master plan project like King's Cross and Canada Water?
Well, it's got to be economically viable, and shit happens, as we've seen with this crisis. And if it wasn't this crisis, every 10 years or 8 years, just look back over the last few decades, you've got to make sure that when shit hits the fan, which it will for whatever reason, you can survive, because what you've put in hasn't drained the resources, finance resources. What you put in can respond to as soon as the market allows, and if you finish the first phase, it's blooming good. It sets the standard, and it's a great place on its own. And if it has to sit there for a year or two or three, whoever's occupied it, feels that they've got good product. Hopefully you can then press on with the next one, but you're never quite sure where the next one's going to be and whether you're going to have to adapt to economically viable phase development. But look for the long term. You can't expect a 40 building project like Canada Water, to shoot the lights out with every building. You've got to say, this is a long-term project. You've got to have the right long-term money. You've got to have the right long-term investors to take something like King's Cross forward, or Brindley Place even, or Canada Water, and British Land. Is that long-term investing? It was one of the first investors in Broadgate right at the beginning. It's looking to build up an income, so therefore it is looking at custodianship, and that's what you've got to do. Good master plan. By the way, Canada Water master plan that hopefully we'll start building fairly soon. We are doing some enabling works. Was master plan 24. Master plan 1 to 23 kind of haven't gone in the bin because some of them were quite good and quite interesting, and you say, well, that's not very good. 24 master plans before you got it. Well, bizarrely, the King's Cross scheme that's being built is being built to master plan 24 at King's Cross, and there were various reasons why it got 23 was okay, 24 was better. Is there a magic number about 24? I think the point I'm trying to get across is master planning is very iterative, and you need a great team of people around you and planners, and to question, and you need to question. It's back to that sleep on it. You think the master plan's right, you go back in the morning and go, could I do this, could I do that, what happens if I do that, what happens if environmental strategy changes, or a new new idea of servicing comes in. Takes time, and it takes good criticism from great people, and it's back to that: assemble a great team and be humble.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Roger. I think we'll bring it to a close there. I think everyone will join me in thank you very much for your value.
Very rudely, I'm going to say one thing. This morning I went out on my 30-minute bike route, and I did it in 28 minutes 36 seconds, which is a record. Okay, so I was very pleased with myself. Now, this view on the screen is the view from Ontario Tower at Canada Water. It's not blown up. It's not. That is the view you get from Canada Water, and it happens to be a 20-minute walk to Tower Bridge. Now, from Canada Water to the Bank of England on a bicycle, we say it's 13 minutes on average, which it is. The record, and I don't want to get people, like doing anything crazy. The record is 8 minutes 35. Okay, so I just put that out there. From Ontario Tower at Canada Water, the Bank of England, whilst lockdown is happening and the roads are quite quiet. 8 minutes 35 to beat, guys.
Get your Strava segments out, everyone. Hopefully we can beat that time. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. We'll bring that to a close, and have a nice day. Cheers.